I think on the multiplayer side of stuff, we did do some really good things there. Sadly, you can't play the multiplayer now because the servers are dead. So.
Welcome to the Industry That's Game Design podcast. Today with our good friend and lead designer of all things playful at TT Games, Tim Spencer. Woo!
Hi, thanks.
Welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me on. It's the very first podcast I've done, so yeah, we'll see how much of a mess I make of myself.
You're going to be amazing, 100%. You've worked on quite a few games that I love. For Oblivion, for example, I mean, that obviously I love Elder Scrolls Oblivion, right? I saw on your Twitter that you've worked on that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? What title you've worked on?
Where do we start? I mean, it's been a very long, strange trip. So I think I'm kind of 19th year now in games. For whatever reason, there were many reasons why, but I didn't actually finish my degree. I was doing a degree at Teesside University in games design. And yeah, it was actually around the time when I got diagnosed with diabetes, and there was a bunch of other stuff going off. And I just got to the point where I was like, this, for me right now, this just isn't working. And I got the offer of an internship at Lionhead Studios. So I went and did that internship. I didn't quite realize it was only for like a week at the time. But afterwards I was like, yeah, no, actually this is what I want to do. And I think probably one of the things for me at uni was I spent a lot of my time just obsessing over games and games design. I grew up in a village in the middle of nowhere where there wasn't much to do other than go out and look at fields and animals. And when you've spent 10 years doing that, it's a bit boring. So I spent a lot of my time playing games on SNES, on my PC. And I discovered that I was like not really playing video games to enjoy them, but I was playing video games to figure out how they worked, how they were put together. That led me into the Doom map editor. And that really for me was the very first kind of time where I was like, yeah, this is good. I'm building a world here. Like I can build rooms and have doors and have enemies, and I can play this multiplayer map with my friends. And as everyone always did with Doom, create an invisible wall that had all the weapons behind it that I can go and steal. And from that point, it just kind of like, it's one of those things, like everybody who made a Doom map did that. Everyone always did. Sure. Like, oh, I'm losing. Right, I'll go to my secret wall and pick up the BFG. Oh, where'd you get the BFG from? Oh, you've got to find it in the level somewhere. So that was kind of
our blessing.
Love it.
So from there, like, because I just spent, before I even got to university, I'd spent like a decade just if not more, obsessing over video games and how they were built. I found that even though I left before I finished my degree, and I'd only done this week's internship, I was like, this is 100% what I want to do. Like just complete, like, it was like a laser focus of that's what I want to do. So obviously I used kind of the year or two I'd already spent at university on my CV as much collateral as I could possibly use it for, and basically then managed to scrape myself a job as a junior designer at Mind's Eye, and that was working on Starsky and Hutch 2, which was going to be a sequel to the PlayStation 2 game. That didn't work out, but because then I had a junior designer kind of credit on my name, I then used that. I worked as QA at Frontier Developments on Wallace and Gromit, which was an amazing experience. I actually think like almost every single developer should spend some time in QA at some point. Like even if it's in the middle of your career and you might be like a creative director of something, see if you can take like just a 6 months secondment as QA, because it will make you a better developer. Like the kind of approach, the kind of mindset that you have when doing QA, you can apply that to the work you're doing, and you can make your designs and make your systems, make what you're building, you can make it much more bulletproof because you're already seeing how you can break it, how the users are going to break it. And you can almost like switch your mind into this mode. So I did QA, and then went back to Lionhead for a bit, just on contract to do some gameplay balancing and tuning. That was on the movies. While I was there, also sort of did stuff in the evenings on, I think it was Black and White 2 at that point, and I'd played BC and things like that. Then went off to Climax. That's where I worked on Oblivion. That was on the handheld system. So that was the Elder Scrolls Oblivion Travels, which unfortunately didn't make it. It's one that got away. this is the thing. These things happen, right? And often they happen completely out of your control. Whether the project's no longer necessary, whether there's financial problems, whether there's decisions that are made completely out of your control, and now unfortunately you're getting the sort of wrong end of this, bad end of the result of that. It happens, but I think at that point, you always have to look at the positive side of it, and you have to sit there and look at it and go, yeah, no, actually, we were building something that was great. The designs that we did, like Todd over at Bethesda had seen the designs, and he'd even said like, oh wow, these guys really know their stuff. I think I always, in my head, I wrote the Dark Brotherhood stuff that we were going to do in Elder Scrolls Travels because it was taking place at the same time as the main console game. It's just that was down in Cyrodiil, and we were kind of up in Ralta and kind of Anticlare and up in those areas. So I even got the opportunity to have Lucien Lachance in the game, even though obviously in the main game, like spoilers for anybody who hasn't played it by now,
15 years ago, it's okay.
Yeah, he does end up, getting killed off in the Dark Brotherhood questline. I could have him in the PSP game because the Dark Brotherhood operates across the entire of the world. So I was kind of like, it was my favorite. We'd managed to play the game before it was out because obviously the guys at Bethesda had sent builds over. I'd played through it obsessively. I'd played all the Dark Brotherhood stuff, and I was like, oh, this is such good stuff. And it was one of those kind of like dream moments where I was like, hang on a minute, I'm working on an Elder Scrolls game. I get to do the Dark Brotherhood questline, which is my favorite questline. I get to do stuff with Lucien Lachance, who everybody thinks is already dead. But actually, they get to play this and see a completely new, canon set of story that was going to be part of that. So that was great. But yeah, that one unfortunately didn't make it out the door. Then went up to Nottingham, to Free Radical Design, where I joined working on Haze, which, it came out. I worked on the multiplayer side of that stuff. And actually, even projects that come out that maybe don't get the review scores that you'd hope for, there's always positive things to take from that. And I think that's probably something that I've learned a lot during my time, is to try to always look at the opportunities and always try and think of like the positive slant that you can take on things. So Haze, I actually really enjoyed working on it. I think on the multiplayer side of stuff, we did do some really good things there. Sadly, you can't play the multiplayer now because the servers are dead. So,
that's the thing with all games, right?
Such is life.
If someone else, I was watching Ian Higton from Eurogamer. He on his YouTube channel, Platform 32, he does teraflops, which is terrifying games that flopped. And Haze, I was watching him play through Haze, so I went and had a look. And there was like people who are trying to reverse engineer the online servers to bring them back. And I'm like, yes, go on.
Do it.
You can do it. You can bring back that content that I spent thousands of hours working on that's now just dead on a disk somewhere.
Crazy.
And then I was working on Battlefront 3, which was great. But I mean, it is what it is. I don't think there's really much I can talk about it because,
well, there's a similar case, like in Haze, where a lot of like fans try to salvage the code that's somehow out there from Battlefront 3, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is with that and with Elder Scrolls Travels, Oblivion, every year there'll be a few people who will like try and email me or DM me and say, hey, have you still got builds of this? And I'm like, no. All right, do you know anybody who has? No. Oh, if you manage to find a build, can you send it to me? No, all this stuff's still under NDA. Like, yeah. I don't own that stuff. I might work on it, but I never own it, So, Battlefront 3, like I said, we had an amazing time working on it. And that was like the first time working on a Star Wars property. And I think there's something very special about working on a brand like Star Wars, these massive brands that I've been very fortunate to work on over my years. That there's like working on original IP is amazing because you're crafting your own thing. So it's your child almost. It's this thing you're 1,000% focused on. And when you're working with somebody else's IP, you're lovingly taking care of that thing, and it brings so many opportunities to do things where like. I mean, an IP like Star Wars is so beloved, it's untrue. Or say, all the Marvel stuff that we've worked with, or DC, because obviously TT Games is owned by Warner Brothers, so we have DC in as one of our properties.
Yeah.
Working with these kind of properties, you're now getting to be part of something that's been way bigger than yourself and your own designs. And there's something very special in that.
Must be daunting as well, kind of, right? If you have the pressure of a fandom this huge, we know how crazy that can be.
Definitely a thing where when somebody comes to you and they're like, "Yeah, so you're going to be like being the level director on the Battle for New York, or from the Avengers, or you're going to be the Hulkbuster." Actually, I did because I was on the handheld side of things at that time, and it's one of those things where the Hulkbuster level, I actually went to the game director and said, "I am doing the Hulkbuster level." And they were like, "Okay." I said, "Yes, that is it. There's no other option here." Like the Hulkbuster. I love mechs. I love robots. I love Iron Man and the Iron Man suits. And so I went to the game director and was like, that's mine. Thankfully, the game director on it had worked with me on a previous game where I'd done a level that was all about mechs and robots. So he was like, "Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, that's fine. We know how much you obsess over robots. It'll be fine. You can do that." But it's one of these things where, like, first time working on Star Wars, it was amazing. There are various reasons why that project didn't come out. It's just one of those things where you just have to go, well, think of your own work that you did on it, and as long as you're happy with like your work and what you did, then at some point you might be able to talk about it. I'm probably still not able to talk about my work on that project, so I'm going to move on to the next bit from there.
We won't ask you. I want to say one thing about a thing that you mentioned when you talked about working on these projects that maybe didn't see the light of day or weren't received as well. You tweeted something in regard to that in the past, where you said that if you don't, it's super important to highlight bad results in the games industry, and also acknowledge mistakes one has made to avoid repeating them and all these kind of things. I think this is a really, really important thing and unique thing to the games industry, because outside in other industries, people are usually, hiding failure, or at least not, or demonizing it even, or not talking about it. But in the games industry, retro perspectives or whatever analyzations of analyzing why something didn't work is super important, and what we do in our indie studios as well. Having like these, hey, what sucks at this game, or what sucked about the last month, and how can we do better in the future? So that's very
absolutely
cool to hear.
I think it's super important, because like every project you do, you will always learn lessons from it. And I did a Prince 2 project management course years ago, and they always were talking about even the projects that fail or the stages that fail. It's important that you've got a lessons log and that you learn these things, because then you don't repeat them in the future. Or if you can see something going the same way in future, you can be like, no, we need to stop here, or we need to change this, or this is a risk here. And you need those kind of people on your project. I mean, I know, like, usually, games are such big, complex monsters, especially the ones that kind of we work on. I mean, Star Wars Skywalker Saga is a classic example. This thing is the biggest game we've ever made. Like, I've only been here 6 years, easily the biggest game we've made since I've been here. Talking to the guys that have been at the studio for like 15 years, they're also the kind of people who are like, yeah, this is the biggest game we've ever made. So these things are massive, complex machines. And yeah, not everything will go right. And it's important to learn those lessons, so that when you're on these kind of projects and you've got kind of a broad range of different people, you've got people who are like super positive, like yes people all the time. But then you've also got the people who are going to stop and go like, hey, hang on a minute. Like, I get where you're going with this thing. This is cool, but you've got to watch out for this. And sometimes I've seen in some places, like in some other studios I've worked at, those kind of people have been kind of sometimes demonized for being a bit negative. But actually, those are the kind of people who will challenge your design and make you a better designer for it, because they will spot things that you haven't spotted yet, because you can't spot everything. Like, I know there's always this kind of discussion sometimes about design by committee versus authorship, and design by a single person. But I think there's a middle ground, and you need other people to look at your design. You need people to kind of like say, that's great, that's your vision, that's what you want to do, but like, I played something like that and this was a problem. Like, how are we avoiding that problem? And it's actually on kind of one of the notes that I wrote down was about not being afraid to show your stuff to other people, like getting other people to look at your work early enough is like really super important, because you'll be able to course correct earlier, and then it will cost you less later. But it also just makes you a better developer to have your own work challenged. It's like that whole, justify your game in 30 seconds. Well, do it with everything you do in games. Like justify your mechanic, justify your level design, like justify the system. And it's one of those things where, it's really important to learn those lessons. And even, just in my history, there's a couple of projects I've worked on that, I think, there's games that have come out that I've worked on, even as a lead at times, and they've not been well received. Dead Space Ignition, that's a good example of this. So that's a game that we made in, I think it was like 6 weeks we made that game in. Because it was Dead Space Ignition itself, while it was the kind of story precursor to Dead Space 2, and the guy at the start of Dead Space 2 actually breaks you out, the engineer who literally gets his face ripped off by necromorph in the first 3 seconds. It's like the first kill of the game. It's like the initial bam. That guy, he was the lead character in Dead Space Ignition. He was this engineer on the station. So the story of Dead Space Ignition actually leads straight into Dead Space 2 and kind of explains some of the points in it. But that was a project that was paid for by the marketing department. It wasn't paid for by the game development. So it wasn't internal to that team. It was the marketing team, and we knew that it was going to be free if you pre-ordered the game. So we always saw it as something that, well, this is something 90% of the people who get this game are probably going to get for free anyway. And if they get the game secondhand, it was like a couple of quid to get it, so that was fine. Yeah. And we always knew that it was going to be a series of kind of hacking mini games. So we were focusing on making the mini games, and you know what? Like most of those mini games, they're good fun. They're short little mini games to put this thing together. But obviously, when it came out, we were going up against, I think it was Dead Rising had done their pre-order bonus, which was about 8 hours of actual gameplay, which they cut from the main game, but then packaged together as the starter. So
just for a bonus. 8
exactly.
hours.
Like if you pre-order it, you get this thing for free, and it's like 8 hours of full third person running around the world doing stuff as you were doing Dead Rising. That came out like the month before or something like that. We rock up with these kind of small mini games with these kind of 2D animations, just these kind of cartoon cinematics between them. And of course, people, when they're looking at it, people don't really think, and this is fine, consumers don't think about really the situation that a project's made in. They don't think of the conditions. Yep. They don't even think of the working conditions. They just care about what they're getting for their money they're spending. And I understand it. You know, I'm a consumer. If I'm paying €70 for a game, I'm going to want to make sure I get the most for that €70, right? It's a lot of money. So, yeah, when Dead Space Ignition got compared to what Dead Rising offered, we got ripped apart for that one. I think the Metacritic is like 4 out of 10 for it or something like that. But again, I look at it and I go, you know, as a team, we, in the space of like 6 weeks, went from nothing to having all of these mini games that were put together. Some people really enjoyed them. Some people didn't. That's fine. With storylines, and it was a kind of branching structure where you had different options and choices that would tell different bits of the story on the station, and it all kind of came down to this one story. And even we knew, we were like, well, as a pre-order bonus, sometimes people won't want to play the mini games. So we even had the option in there to just watch the cinematics. We were like, if you want, fine, skip the games. Like, we don't mind. Because at the end of the day, the user experience is what counts, right? And we don't want to have people to have to fight with this thing to get the good stuff. So we made this thing in like 6 weeks, and we had actually really a good time making it. And there were some people who liked it. So even there, in like the worst of projects, there's always lessons to be learned. And there's more. There was a racing game that we worked on at Sumo called Scorched, which was an iOS game. It was kind of their first foray into mobile game. But that, again, it's one of those games where it was a good, fun little game, but it wasn't anything that really hit any traction. But we still, you know, the team that came together and made it, and what we did and what we managed to do in the time, you know, there's still lessons to be learned and things to be proud of there. Like that's one of the things. Even on the worst of projects, there's still things that you personally can be proud of. You know, if you've done everything you possibly can do, that's all that really can be asked of you. So,
can I ask you something about the thing that you mentioned with allowing your players to skip the cinematics, because you said that this is kind of you want to give the player the choice, right? And for me, this is a problem that is currently in many of the games available, is that studios are pushing to trade fun for balance. Often, if you see this in World of Warcraft, for example, when there's WoW prunings of spells, right? Or you take away vanity spells that are only there for fun, or you nerf cheese threats to the ground so they can't be played anymore. It feels like the designers are taking fun away from the player, and that makes the player base frustrated, right? And so I'm wondering what would be the ideal path here, because you seem to be in the camp of yes, fun number one.
Yeah, I mean, really, I always come back to what is the user experience. Sometimes you have to swallow your own pride, and you just have to go, and you have to be honest with yourself. Like this is something that I've battled with myself, and I know other designers have. That you can craft this thing, you can design a level, you can design a mechanic, and you know it inside out. And you know that it works perfectly with this, and it synergizes with this, and it does this, and it does this. But really, it comes down to what your players are thinking and how they're feeling. And you have to be honest with yourself about it. Like it comes back to get other people to play your stuff and see what they think. Because if they come back and say, no, actually, you've taken my class fantasy of a paladin and you've removed all of these vanity spells, which didn't really have much use. Yeah. But we had some fun times with Turn Undead, didn't we? It's one of the most useless spells. And there's the occasional boss where there's one enemy that comes up. Yeah, this is that one time.
I got it.
I've been playing this game for 23,000 hours, and there's one boss where there's this one mob that comes out that I can use Turn Undead on. And I'm going to use that spell on that thing because that's my class fantasy. You should keep that stuff in, rather than kind of going, oh, well, it's not efficient enough, or, oh, well, it's just, it's a dead spell. Don't worry about it. I think just going back to the kind of original point, it's always think about it from the user's perspective, and you're not always the user. That's one of the key things to think about, is that quite often, I'd probably say for the majority of the games industry, we're working at studios where we don't own the studio, we don't own the IP, we don't own the product. So we are making something for other people. This kind of goes back to something that we've been doing quite a lot in TT lately, which is really kind of looking at the audience and trying to understand who your audience is. And then from that, almost taking yourself out of the situation and going, okay, well, what does that audience love? Can we identify the different demographics in this audience? There's some really great stuff by a company called Quantic Foundry, who they research user types and user demographics. And they are absolutely brilliant, and the information from them is fantastic, and we've used it quite a lot in the past, where you can identify the people who are architects and like to build stuff. That's certainly people who like Minecraft, they're architects, but also dabblers, they are people who like to just dabble in a game. They're not interested in doing I'm going to use far too many World of Warcraft references in this thing.
It's okay. Go ham.
I'm going to blame Shadowlands for being so good, because it's really great. So it's one of those things where, not everybody is going to be mythic raiders. They're just not, right? They're just going to dabble in the game, and that's where these people just drop in. They want to play a little bit. They want to have a little bit of the class fantasy. They like the look of the game. But if you then make the experience of the game really complex and hardcore, that's going to turn them off, because they can't dabble in what they want to see, and using these kind of different archetypes and user types, that helps you to make decisions on what you're trying to design. And I think that, again, it comes back to this kind of always consider the user rather than considering yourself. Say, if we're designing a Lego game, then we're looking at what our audience is, first of all, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, we have analytics that show people of all ages play Lego video games. That's fine. But where are the peaks and the troughs? Who are the majority of the people playing? Well, we can make guesses. We can use our kind of Zen experience to make guesses. And there is a certain amount of games design that is based on Zen, on feeling. But also you've got to then try and back that up. It's kind of like that old saying, trust but verify. So I might design something and say, well, our users are going to love this. Well, it's well, get some of our users to play and see. and get them to see and play it before it's too late. Because you don't want to be 2 years down a project and you suddenly discover this thing that you thought they loved, they actually don't. But there's this other thing that they do love, and we could have had that option at that point, and we should have taken that. And there's a whole bunch of kind of this topic as a general topic. It's got so many facets to it, because there's topics like MVP, so minimum viable product.
Yeah.
So that's kind of doing the minimum you need to do now to prove out what you're making before it's too late.
Yeah.
Don't build a skyscraper if people want manor houses. Well, start building the foundations. Well, first of all, go and ask people what they want, and then start building the foundations and come bring them in and show them and say, this is how it's going. And, using those kind of stages to make sure that you're not wasting time and resources, because that's often what happens in games, right? Like, it's one of those things where if every game was built with MVP in mind, then pretty much every game would come out on time and on budget, right? But it's one of those things where, I think as designers especially, we always need to remind ourselves that we need to be proving out what we're saying, or we need to be backing up what we're saying. And, people will trust what we say, but we should also verify, and we should also have our design challenged.
Yeah,
so,
but you're also walking the line as a designer, right? If you design this mechanic is going to be awesome, or you hope it's going to be, so you sell it as it's going to be awesome. You're guessing, and then people want to playtest it, and maybe it's not ready yet. So at some point, you have to also make decisions where maybe a feature is worth pushing and prototyping more than another feature would be, and then it's not as easy to prove. And especially in indie, you're suddenly stuck somewhere where you have to decide if certain, are you only going to be taking mechanics that people already love, or are you going to try to innovate because you're an indie game and you need to stand out through a USP, right, with a unique thing that only you have, and then you're suddenly no one has seen this unique thing, but so they probably don't like it. It's a very thin line to walk, I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it's I think of the projects that have been the most successful with that kind of thing, I don't know that any of them have had an actually cast iron perfect process to guarantee they're going to pick the right thing. I think, it's almost like the same to a certain extent with films. Sure, you can make a formula all the time and you can guarantee a kind of a minimum level of quality. But if you want to be going for that kind of masterpiece level, it's there's no surefire way to pick that. There are things that you can use to help make decisions. And this is kind of something that, so this is a method that a guy called Gareth Wilson, who actually is my boss now. So,
shout out.
It's fine, yeah. Shout out to my boss. So
we'll tag him.
When I was at Sumo Digital, after Free Red, I went to Eurocom, and then I went out of games for a bit, hated my life, wanted to be back in games. I was actually doing a job that paid more, had less hours, was easier work, but I just hated every morning not being able to wake up and say I was a game designer. So I came back into games, and Sumo Digital were very good and graciously let me have a 3-month contract, which I snapped their arm off for. And after a month, they said, no, actually, you can stay. And I was like, cool, okay. Well, when we were there, I was working on Sonic Racing Transformed. And Bizarre Creations had gone under, and we hired a guy called Gareth Wilson, who had been a lead on some of the PGR games and lead on Blur, so he knew his stuff when it came to racing games. And when he came over, he kind of had a technique where, and it's actually a very common technique. I don't know if he'll lay claim to it himself or whether he'll just go, oh, no, actually, this is what everybody uses. But you define your key goals, first of all. Define those goals of what you're trying to do. You can define those goals from looking at your audience and from looking at what game you're trying to make and from doing competitive analysis and saying well, what are the other games in this genre that people love? Fine, cool, okay, we know that. We can pull out the ingredients that are common in those things, and you can find these threads, and you can say, well, okay, these 4 goals here, of these goals, well, these 2 are ones that we know this genre loves, so we can have these goals. And then these 2 goals here are kind of the new things that we're bringing in, or things that are in other genres that we're now marrying into this genre to create something unique and new. Well, you use those to help you decide what is really important. Yep. If that stuff has been distilled by either coming from user insight, user feedback, research into the genres, or even sometimes if that stuff you've come up with from kind of just Zen design, thinking it up, but then you've proven it out later. So I could come up with a key goal that's this, and I'd be like, this is it. Well, then take that to your research and then get that research back to say that, yes, this is. Those are the things that you use to decide whether you do or don't do something. And when it comes down to things like, hey, like this feature here, you only have 3 weeks of a programmer's time. That's all you've got. Like your feature is way too big. There's way too much time against all of these tasks in here. What do you want to do? It's like at that point you look at your goals, and sometimes you have to be honest with yourself and just go, actually, do you know what? Getting this multiplayer map in is not as important as finishing off this story level map here. So actually, that's going to be something more that our users want. That's going to give our game more quality. So let's spend the time on that instead. And it's hard. It's really hard because you could have spent hundreds of hours, with this vision in your head of this amazing map or this amazing mechanic. Yeah. And yeah, but the best thing is, and this goes back to kind of looking at the opportunities in everything. Don't ever bin it. Do not ever bin that design. Do not ever bin that like level layout. Don't bin that mechanic. Don't bin that system, because I guarantee you at some other point in your career, either another studio or another project or on the sequel or on the DLC, it'll come back round to that thing. Classic example of this is the level Effect and Cause from Titanfall 2, which is, the people are pretty much doing like masterclass designs on that level because it is like chef kiss. Mwah. It's the kind of level that you play. It's the kind of level that you play, and afterwards you kind of just sit back in your chair and you're like, what am I doing? Like this thing is so obscenely good. Like, what am I doing? The ideas from that level of this teleporting idea between time, the guys over at Respawn did some really good dev diaries, and the guy who created it said, actually, I didn't create it for Titanfall. I did this. He did it in like a mod like 5 years or 10 years earlier in Half-Life, and it was an idea he was playing around with. And then it became one of Titanfall 2's greatest levels, like years later. So again, like even if something doesn't work out, even if something gets scrapped, learn the lessons, like keep that work, keep that positivity and that optimism, because at some point it'll come back to being something that you'll end up working with. But I think, going back to your original point, like how do you make sure you choose the right thing when you don't quite know what the right thing is? I don't think there's any cast iron answer to that. There are some things that you can certainly have like a 1 or 0, a binary response to. You can say, look, our users really liked going to the right and not to the left. So, okay, well, fine. We this bit of level goes to the right. That's very clear. When it comes to mechanics and systems, they're a bit more complex because of the layers of depth that can often be involved in them. And I've seen this before where sometimes we can over-engineer things because we are adults making video games, right? Yep. I mean, I've done this myself in some Lego games. Thankfully, through feedback, through getting other people to play it, I recognize these things early, and or other people have come to me and gone, hey, this thing's way too complex, and we've just distilled it down to something which our users can really get to grips with. You can make something that has vast layers of depth, but there's a point where only you and a very tiny percentage of people understand it and can work with it. Again, go back to the majority of the people who are playing your game, get them to play it. If that is exactly what they enjoy and like, great. And this is where I think the industry is changing, certainly in the last 5 to 10 years compared to before that, because everything was always so closed off. Everything was closed doors, in-house only. You didn't get to see the game till it was like on a cartridge or on a disc and it went out the door, and patches weren't that much of a thing. Now it's very different to that, really. The whole early access topic, which is a massive topic, right? It's something that helps us as designers to really course correct early on. Video games and even video game studios, they've always been described to me as massive oil tankers, right? Once these things get moving and they're going in a direction, you can change the direction, you can, but it's just like it takes so long and so much effort to course correct. Whereas if they course correct like 10 miles back, It's a bit easier now where they're getting to go. So this is where things like early access is brilliant. Doing betas is brilliant. Getting people into your, if you're in a situation where your work and stuff that's under non-disclosure agreement can be shown to people, getting people into to try this thing, getting your demographic to try it is really great. And thankfully in Warner Brothers, we've got I shouldn't call it Warner Brothers, we're Warner Media now. We keep on buying other companies and getting bought out and swapped out. I think it's Warner Media these days.
Just casually buying half the market, easy.
It's a bit wild at the minute. Is with Microsoft going around kind of buying up everybody, which I think is brilliant. I mean, they've got so much money, like they might as well, because But yeah, so Warner Brothers has got a knowledge department, and their entire job is literally to go and ask people about stuff. Like, we will send them information, we will give them like designs, we will give them playable demos, we will give them different things and say, please go to the people, because we are all adults making a video game, right? And while Lego games are played by everybody and are designed for everybody, we know that the majority of our player base is in this kind of younger bracket before they get up to about 12, 13, and then it drops off. And then they sort of come back in their sort of mid-20s and 30s for various reasons, either because they just want kind of casual, relaxed games to play, or because they've now got kids of their own and they can now play those games with their kids. We know this stuff happens. But we're not 12-year-old kids. So we can design something, but at the end of the day, it's not for us. So we have to part use our Zen design, but then also make sure we get that kind of backed up through this feedback. So again, when it comes back to what are you going to pick from these things? Are you going to say the red pill or the blue pill? Well, thankfully, nowadays there's quite a lot of information out there to help you do that if necessary. So,
have you ever shipped something without cross-checking it or letting it play test, like for time constraints or something, getting something in late in production and not having the time to verify it? Or
yeah, I mean, I think that certainly happens. As projects, as you get towards deadlines and you get towards release dates, certainly in a lot of the projects that I've worked on, they haven't been live services. So they've been projects that are, once they go out the door, there might be a day 1 patch, a day 30 patch, maybe some DLC, but that's it. You don't have much chance to fix things after that. And certainly when it's in like the last few months, and that there's no extension to be had. There's nothing else that you can do. That is the date that it's going out the door on. And it's not going to change because marketing has already spent 10, 15, 20, 30 million dollars on shelf space and on TV ads and all this kind of stuff. So there's no way, there's no stopping this oil tanker now.
Already back in the arm.
It's coming into port no matter what you do. Then you certainly at that point you have to just make a judgment call based on your Zen. But you can also get people on your team to try it. Like generally, you will have either leads above you, department heads above you, people in QA. Going down and talking to QA is like, again, brilliant, best thing you can do, especially a designer. I'm so obsessed with having QA inside a team rather than QA being outside of it, because these are the people who know your game better than you know your game. They're playing your game more than you are. Like, they know everything in your game way more. They might not know what's coming soon, as the people on the development team know what's coming in the future, but they know the current state of your game right this second. Like, if you go down on a Monday afternoon, or really you should have QA embedded in your team, so you can literally just turn around to your embedded QA and go, hey, how's the game at the minute? Like, those are the people you can talk to. And if it comes down to, like, because I've done this before, it's Friday afternoon, it's deadline time, you've got to make a choice on something. Sure, you could roll the dice, or you could pick something based on your own knowledge and experience. You might have done something previously where you know where to go based on feedback from reviews or something. But you can also like grab somebody from QA and go, what do you think of this? And it's always quite interesting, kind of the response, because when you've been to studios before that haven't done that, like I worked in a studio that kept them apart from the dev team. They thought I was crazy when I went to speak to them, because they were like, well, what? You're from the dev team. What are you doing here to talk to us?
I would kill for QA in the indie studio. I would kill for it, and I don't have to play it myself all the time. I do, of course. You always have to play it yourself, but having someone play especially I am in charge of systems design, or most of the balancing enemies, wave spawners, balancing items, balancing currencies, all of these things interacting with each other, all these layers of systems gripping into each other. And me adjusting one value over there changes 15 values here, and then having someone, while I still tinker with the values, who could actively test the things that I'm already deploying to the build would be a godsend in indie. So yes, I understand your love for QA.
QA is brilliant. Like a good QA. There are going to be some programmers that hate me from saying this, but I would take one good QA over one okay programmer any day of the week. Like, just because that good QA person will make your game better. Like, they just will. They will. And I've always said to like QA when I've worked with them, and even just to anybody in the team, I've said, look, if you don't think something is good, if you don't think something is right, just tell us. Tell the design team. Come over to people and talk to them. Like, and that can be quite hard sometimes because it can create conflicts, and someone can come over and go, "Yeah, I don't like this," and I'll be like, "Oh, you're crushing my dreams." But all I know is I'll go. There's one really funny thing I had in some annual feedback about 5 years ago, which they said like, "Your feedback's great. Everybody, it's brilliant, but there is one little bit," and I was like, "What's that?" They said, "Well, whenever somebody comes to you with bad news, you always look angry for a few seconds, but then you're okay about it." And I'm like, well, if somebody comes up with me bad news, most people look angry for a little bit. So I think I've managed to work on that.
Your baby, right?
Exactly. But I always say to them, okay, explain to me why. Like what is it about this you don't like? And it's always about making sure that people understand you're open to constructive criticism at all times. Because the thing is, like, I've got a whole raft of notes on this kind of stuff, by the way, all these kind of soft skills and communicating with people, because design is about communication. It's about making sure that people are comfortable coming up to you to say, hey, I don't like this thing, or I don't understand. I've had it so often when people are like, I don't like this thing. And I'll go, okay, tell me why. What don't you like about it? What was your frustration? What was your anger? And they'll explain it to me, like, step by step. I'll say, okay, take me through exactly what you did. And you start to sort of pick out those threads again. And you go, actually, I've not explained this thing well enough to you. Or, do you know what? This mechanic it's just too complex for this. Like, why am I overcomplicating this thing? Like, why have I got so many steps for somebody to go through to make this thing work? Like, is there any way we can reduce that down? Or, actually, do you know what? This thing just isn't working how I wanted it to work. And it's a difficult one, because people coming up to you saying, I've got a problem, I don't like this, is always a difficult thing to hear. And I think especially, like, I think the whole COVID lockdown thing has made everybody a little bit more sensitive about things. So it can be even harder to do when somebody's not right in front of you. Like, when, if you're just on a Zoom call and somebody's coming to you going like, hey, I played this thing, it's really bad, it's a complete mess. And you're like, it's less of a blow if they're right in front of your face saying it than on a Zoom call behind a monitor, because you can just think, oh, I'm having internet troubles right now. Click.
Is that you're breaking up?
It's that classic, I can't quite hear you. I'm going out of signal. It's easy doing it face to face. But it comes back to this making sure that you've always got stages, you've always got ways to cope with things, and to when your design isn't going right, or when you've got something at the 11th hour. Again, QA, brilliant. Always have them as embedded QA all the time. They will always make your game better. And the thing is about embedded QA is that it's not just like collision testing in a level. Like, they become junior producers very easily, because they make sure the build is working. They even then make sure things are deployed properly, as well as being able to like have test plans. And what you find is that because they're in the team and know what's going on, and their bugs are higher quality, and you get more efficient work out of them, so then you can use their time for other things. And they deeply appreciate it, because they're in the team. They're part of the team. They're not separate to it. Asking other people, like that's the biggest thing of how to make decisions and stuff, is getting other people's opinions on things.
Okay, before handing over to Sven for a couple of his curious questions, I'd like to share you mentioned earlier that you should keep a learning log, right? A journal of your own personal learnings. And so I just pulled up mine. It's like 40 pages of whatever of the last year. And one of the points is exactly what you just mentioned. It's that differentiating what feedback actually means. Like if a player or a fellow designer gives you the feedback, hey, this wave that I here experienced, like wave 11 was super boring. And then that is not an insult to your design skills, but you as a designer need to understand what does it mean? This wave is super boring could mean that was there not enough action? Was the wave too long in seconds? Was the level of progression here not, or the rewards not okay, or the mechanics were boring? And then you have to take all these things into account, because the person who's playtesting your thing can't see all the levels that are of complex systems that are in place here, and you have to just make something out of that feedback yourself, right? That's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. It's that kind of getting at what the goal is. Looking at the goal, but also trying to figure out, okay, yeah, they thought wave 11 was boring. Okay, show me. Like, why? Like, talk to me about it. Let me try and understand where you were coming from. Like, what build did you have? What was your team composition? What were you doing in wave 11? Because the player is almost never wrong. Either we haven't taught them properly, or what they're doing are systems that the game has allowed for. Right? We've put that system in there. They're using it however they want. It's not, I'm nobody to turn around and say, yeah, but you're playing it wrong. Like, I'm just not. Like, it's
maybe no one should say that.
Exactly, because it's the player, their experience, they're using the systems, and this thing's now taken on a life of its own. So trying to understand exactly why they don't like a system is super important, and it's why I play a lot of games that aren't the master classes of some of the games that are out there. We have to do competitive analysis of the other genres, not just the good ones. There's for every like Last of Us, you will find like 100 games in the same kind of third-person story genre that have failed. But you need to understand why they failed. You can't just understand why Last of Us was good. Like, you need to understand both, so you can aim for one and dodge the other.
That's a great point.
And it comes back to talking, and it comes back to this thing where I think game development as a whole is about communication, and it's about when people come to you and say they don't like something, don't worry, that's fine. Obviously, if somebody comes up to you and says, well, this is crap, I don't like this car game, I only like aeroplane games. And it's like, well, at that point, you're like, well, I don't really have much for you.
The right testers for the right game.
Funnily enough, even working on Sonic Racing Transformed, I was never really into car games, but I worked on a car game, and you start to naturally design things where you're like, oh no, hang on a minute, if we put this system in there, I might enjoy it a bit more. And if I enjoy it more, then maybe people who don't enjoy car games might enjoy it a bit more. And I think that comes down to this arcade versus simulation.
People don't enjoy the game anymore because you took out the feature that made car game people love the game.
Yeah, that is a problem then. Like, you should have definitely identified that before taking it out.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, again, coming back to it, not everybody has like a knowledge department that you can take stuff to, right? Especially like indie developers. Don't get me wrong, you can hire Quantic Foundry, and there's numerous other different knowledge companies you can hire, but that's a cost, right? And certainly as smaller developers, that's a huge problem. There has to be a point where you have to rely on your competitive analysis, on your research, and on certainly sometimes your own Zen gut feeling. You can't design everything by insight research, and this is actually something I was watching today. I was watching a video all about Anthem, and Anthem's sort of where it is, kind of the troubles with it. And I'm just going to pull up a picture on my desktop here because I saved a screenshot of this because I thought it was so ace. So there was a guy, the lead writer, a guy called Drew Karpasian. When he left the studio, he mentioned that as BioWare became more corporate, they were less able to make what we loved, and teams were pushed to create games based on market research rather than our creative instincts and passions. And I looked at that and I was like, this is really interesting, because obviously, again, at Warner Media, we have a huge knowledge department that's feeding us information. And there's always this fear in any creative industry that you are now designing by numbers, right? Yep. If the spreadsheet says this number is 12 and this number is 5, then we should go for the 12 one no matter what. And as a designer or as a creative person, your control is now gone, right? That's not actually what that knowledge should be used for. That's not how it should be used. It should be used to guide your decisions. But it's not the only thing that dictates your decision. It's just part of this kind of big mix of ingredients that you should be looking at when you're trying to design something and create something. So, if you do just design by numbers, if you design purely by feedback, not by insight knowledge, before you've got feedback on what you're actually building, then you will end up just making games based on market research. But what you often find is
like a product owner, right?
Exactly. You're coming and going, well, what's the latest numbers said? Oh, the latest numbers have said this needs to be green. Okay, put in a bug, make that green. Off you go. I'm being a designer. Well, that's not what we want to do. And also that's not how the kind of masterclass games are made.
Like Dark Souls and Demon Souls, they would have never come to be if they listened to their testers saying, "Oh, this is way too hard. It's so frustrating."
Exactly.
And
there are sometimes, the Soulsborne genre is something that I really, it's something you can't help but admire. And there are many, many lessons to be taken from it. One of the things that I think makes it difficult for other studios to do games like that is just the fact that, I don't think the Soulsborne genre, even with the massive success of Bloodborne and of obviously being a launch title on the PS5, Demon Souls remake is going to make a ton of money. Because, being a launch game on a new console, that is, again, ching, ching, ching. You're making money back on it no matter what it is.
On yourself.
Yeah. But I think in general, that genre hasn't hit that kind of critical number where bigger studios like EA makes FIFA makes billions of dollars. You're not going to make billions of dollars off of a Soulsborne game yet. I don't think, despite the genre being a good decade or two old now and having many great examples in it, I don't think it's yet hit its stride. I think that genre still has brilliant, it's going to have a watershed moment. It's going to have it. Certainly for us as gamers and hardcore gamers, we're we love this challenge. We love the mechanics. This completely appeals to our designer lizard brains that love mechanics and systems. And I like the idea of being able to play this game without wearing any armor, only punching enemies, and I don't get hit once through the whole thing because that's
exactly
that's my layers of mastery in there. I love that stuff, right? Sure, that appeals to us, but to the average person who is. And the average person, by the way, is the majority of the money in games. These are the people who will buy a Halo, they will buy a FIFA, they will buy a Need for Speed, they'll buy 5 to 6 games a year, sometimes maybe only 2 or 3 games a year, and that's it. They're the biggest majority of the games industry in terms of money. And these are commercial software products we're making, right? We've always got to make our money back, or else we go under. We can't feed our family, we can't pay our mortgages.
True.
So. I think that genre, it's brilliant. And like you say, if they'd have listened and made that game purely on market research, that game would have never come out in the way that it did. And that would have never made the genre that it does. And those games wouldn't do. I think the scale of those projects is such that it makes it a bit easier to have them as a risk. I don't think that From Software, if they released, to be honest, if From released any Soulsborne type game, they're not going to lose money on it because they can put the word From in the butt. They're always going to make it right. But if another company came out and made that, like the Surge series of games, and those series of games, they have done a sequel. I don't know if they're working on a third one now, but certainly it never made as much money as the Soulsborne games did because people are playing those going, well, I can spend €70 on Dark Souls or Bloodborne, or I can spend €70 on this game that's unproven by a studio who's never made this stuff before. And the scores aren't quite the same as this because obviously they're trying to do something different. And there's a lot of people who review it that just want Bloodborne 2 and they don't want the Surge 2. So you're going to lose a few points no matter what at certain points because it's all a popularity game.
That's also about setting. part of the Souls appeal, sorry for interrupting, is the struggle, right? And it mirrors the human struggle, right? Our maybe depression, work from home, COVID, all of these kind of things. This is mirrored on a challenge that we go in our everyday lives, getting to a point where you're happy where you are. That's mirrored in the Dark Souls setting. And I think a lot of people or companies who are making games that are based on a Soulsborne series only take the hard gameplay and ignore the world building, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The world building is super important. And again, if they've done their research on the Soulsborne series, if they've got their insight from the people who play them, you're right. Because if you talk to a lot of people, sure, they're the kind of get good audience who are like, just they care about the mechanics. They don't even know what the story is. They don't know who anybody is. They just know that this one boss, if you dodge here, then you can just punch him in the neck all the time and you never get hit. But you look at the majority of the people, they like the theme and the style. They're buying this thing based on the look of this stuff. And, you look at Demon Souls, that you're this knight fighting these ridiculously massive monsters, in this kind of like gothic setting. And, it's all a bit heavy metal, but there's these different classes. But, wow, look at that dragon burning the entire bridge. And look at how am I going to fight this thing that's as tall as a tower and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, like if you're making something that's in that genre, it's the world building that really makes it. And actually, Ubisoft have had numerous kind of talks on this, and they've done stuff at their kind of Ubisoft conference and even internally, where they talk about the world building almost being more important than the mechanics at times. Like there is actually, I'll try and dig out a link to it at some point. There's a really, really amazing presentation by one of the guys who used to be at Ubisoft's headquarters, where the whole thing was just about world building. It was like, it wasn't about mechanics. It was like, when we're building a project from the very start, when we're concepting it, we don't really necessarily care about the mechanics unless it's something that is so unique. It's going to be the linchpin of the whole project. It's more about building this fantasy that people want. And that's what video games are, right? Nowadays, majoritively, they're about satisfying a fantasy. I want to be that knight who can take down a dragon the size of a tower without wearing any outfit and just punching them and not taking a single hit. Like that's what they want. So yeah, you make a very good point that the setting is something which maybe it didn't have that kind of soul to, but
setting is of course always, that was also selling me, as you mentioned, Ubisoft does that a lot, is what's selling me on Assassin's Creed. If I like the setting, I'm playing that specific entry, and if I don't like that setting, I'm skipping on it, for example. Yeah. If I feel like pirate, then of course I'm sold. Yeah.
Just that pirate simulator. And that's where I think, a lot of people playing
They made the best pirate game by accident. Didn't want to make a pirate game, wanted to make Assassin's Creed, but it's a pirate game.
Well, it's really interesting with the kind of Assassin's Creed, the way that Ubisoft's co-studios work, because they're each working on a different feature set. So like the team at Singapore made the ship combat and all the pirate combat stuff. And it's easy for them because where they are, they look out their window and they literally have like a tropical environment they can build. And it's like, hey, we're making a game that's in this tropical. Well, that's pretty easy. What should that watercolor look like? Well, we'll look out the window. yeah, turquoise. And so they, that's why I think with a lot of Ubisoft games, there's this really interesting thing sometimes where certain parts of it are just brilliant. And it's because the studio has just managed to get that kind of real kind of moment, that apex of the corner. They've managed to hit it at the right time with the right people, doing the right kind of systems. I mean, I'm super looking forward to Skull and Bones when it comes out.
If it comes out.
I think it will come out. I think so. I played it a few years ago at Gamescom. And it was fantastic.
Really? Was there something playable? I didn't know that.
Yeah. That was 2018. They had a playable demo. But again, this is where when I came out, they had people stood there with tablets saying, right, here you go. We've got like 10 questions for you to answer them. So again, it comes back to getting people to play your game, picking your audience and seeing what they liked and didn't like. I really enjoyed it. I made somebody very angry in it though. It had a really cool system where the setup was like, there's like 16 players in this area. They deliberately made the area smaller and there was more events because it's a demo that you only had like 10 minutes to play. So we're playing this thing. And I mean, I picked this massive galleon where its ultimate ability, it could fire like 1 million like cannonballs out. It was like, okay, it's definitely the kind of thing that if you see someone on half health, you are just going to wreck them with it. Well, it had objectives. Some of them were PvE and some of them were PvP. Some of them were shooter things, some of them were collector thing. And it was really enjoyable. And there was a mission that we got, which was to destroy this massive PvE fort. And I teamed up with like 2 other boats that were near me, of other players who were on the booth with me. And we took out this fort. Now, their next objective was to go and destroy some like little sloops or something, some little galleons. My objective was to kill 2 players. So I was like, okay, well, you guys are just turning over here and you're heading towards your objective. Well, I'm just going to swing between you 2 guys. I fire cannonballs on either side. I just popped my ultimate. And because they were already on half health from fighting this fort, just melted them, absolutely melted them. And from across the booth, there was a guy literally instantly started just the most. I'm going to assume they're in German. They weren't in English. Just shouting things. People around me were laughing, and I was like, that started as soon as I started doing this. I mean, I'm not going to say it was me, but there's a correlation there between what I was doing, what they were doing. And yeah, when both ships sunk, I heard a controller getting slammed on the desk. So I was like, oops. Good demo, guys. So I'll make the exit now. I'll get out of here. But it was good and it was fun. And it was that kind of thing again, like that pirate simulator, that fantasy. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with it, because I'm pretty sure that they know that they had a good foundation there. I think there's just a lot of kind of like metagame and systems that they need to figure out. And that's the kind of stuff where, if you rock up to somebody who is a casual player and say to them, here is a pirate simulator where you get to do PvE stuff and some PvP stuff. You can opt out the PvP if you want to. You can live your pirate fantasy in a high definition game at 4K, 60 frames a second. Your mates can come along and be in their pirate ships, and you can all sing sea shanties and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be a winner. And that's where Sea of Thieves, that's some of the things that is the most popular in Sea of Thieves. Like, sure, there's this very small contingent who love the PvP. And they are the people who will rock up to you and just destroy you in 2 seconds and steal all your loot and just make you rage. It's why I quit the game. I don't play Sea of Thieves. I'm too much of a cowbird to play it now.
I did nothing else but that. I only know that.
I mean, in the beta, we did a lot of that. And don't get me wrong, I come from a clan of like a few hundred people who just love doing that. They are very sharp-toothed, grizzly PvP players. Yeah. But there's just a point where I was like, this is too hardcore. But all the PvE content they've added in since then is just brilliant, because you get to live out this pirate fantasy, right? And as long as you just sort of avoid the galleons as much as you can when you're in a little 2-man sloop, then you're okay and you can get along with it. But again, it's about video games satisfying a fantasy. Like, that's it, It's weirdly enough, that actually goes to something that was said to me 20 years ago when I was at Teesside University by their lead design lecturer, a guy called Mike Holton. Now, Mike, I think in one of his very first lectures just said video games are about satisfying a fantasy. I mean, I'd also augment that with they are also a commercial software product. So satisfying the fantasy is actually just part of making sure you're successful and can still feed your kids in a month's time.
Oh, yeah.
There are very few games that are
between entertainment and artistry, in a sense, right?
This is it. I mean, I sometimes almost get a bit jealous of projects that are built through the goal of those projects isn't to make a fun, playable experience that makes money, because you do get projects that are made using grants and funding and through different kind of charities and things like that that will fund a video game. And the video game is there to teach or to create emotion. And that might not necessarily be an emotion that is one you enjoy. There are games out there that even though they're nothing like the real world, they teach you a lesson in some way that might not be a happy lesson, but at the end of the game, you appreciate what it's taught you. I'm man enough to say that there are video games that have made me cry. Like,
same.
You know what I mean? Like To the Moon. At the end of that game, I cried my eyes out. And there is, even like games like this War of Mine, I actually got to a point where I couldn't play it anymore because I was like, this is just dark. But it did make me then go and donate to the Red Cross and a few other charities, because I was like, yeah, actually, do you know what? Like, a video game is nothing like the situation these people have had to be in. They aren't. Like, you see the World War II level from Call of Duty, and everyone's like, yeah, this is great. It's like, sure, real life isn't like that, but sometimes games do teach you that. And those games are generally ones that aren't designed as a financial product. They're designed to be an art piece. And I sometimes get a bit jealous of that, because I think, yeah, it would be quite nice to kind of be in a situation where that's your goal, you know. Maybe it's just because I've not had that in my career yet, but we'll see at some point.
Having that freedom, basically.
Yeah, but also, I guess, kind of terrifyingly having that responsibility as well.
Oh, yeah. As like an indie team, definitely. I mean, if you don't have having the backbone of the budget of a big publisher behind you, then it's a
but also the kind of responsibility of, like, say if you were making a video game that's being funded by a homeless charity in order to kind of advertise and promote, you know, supporting ways to try and stop and alleviate homelessness, right? If you're then the lead designer put on that project, you're like, right, so I've got to try and make a game that people are going to want to play, and this game is going to, in some way, get them to try and understand or appreciate those emotions and those situations and the plight of those people's situations. That's a big responsibility. You know, I think in some ways, kind of maybe I have it easy, because in some ways it's always just like, yep, kids love smashing up Lego and rebuilding a thing. That's fine.
Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good point you're mentioning with if you think about all the things, like talking about important issues from representation to, I don't know, topics like homelessness. How are you, even as a person in our way of life, how we even, you know, how can we even speak about homelessness? Those are these. So we need to find people that can consult and make this this game then, or this journey or art piece then believable and a real thing, you know, not something that I think you actively have to avoid making something that looks or feels like it's supposed to make money, because otherwise people are going to imply shallowness, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, you know, I think probably the approach from that, I think if you're working on a project like that and you're not sincere about the goals, then you shouldn't be working on that project.
Yeah.
You know, you will know yourself. I'd also recommend anybody out there to go and find out more about yourself. Like, use the Myers-Briggs method, use the DISC method, understand who you are. So if you're on a project like that, then yeah, you need to be sincere about what the goal of that project is, you know. And I think if you approach that kind of thing with sincerity, okay, sure, like, even though we're on this project, we're not in that situation that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
You need to understand that you're using your opportunity to further their opportunities. Yeah. Like, you need to be understanding that you're, you know, it's not a game for you, and it's probably not a game for most of your mates who are, you know, hardcore PvPers. What this game is for, like, you need to really understand what that's for and be sincere about that goal of what you're doing. Because then when you approach a problem in it, or when you're saying, right, we're going to try and define the key pillars of what this thing is.
Yeah.
And we're going to try and define the goals. Well, we need to know information. Like, you need to read people's experiences, go and talk to people. Maybe stay on the streets for a few nights. I don't know. I mean, that's risky because it's dangerous. You know, don't put yourself at risk. But what you've got to understand is that you are now a conduit.
Yeah.
For an opportunity to teach people about something else. And some video games, that's their goal anyway, even though it's not necessarily about something like homeless, right? I think there are a lot of games where the soul of them, the heart of them, comes back to this teaching people about things in a way that now is in a context that they can understand, that in other media they might not understand or might not even watch it. Like, I might not watch a romantic comedy film, but I might see that show up in, I don't know, Genshin Impact because it's Breath of the Waifu, and I might now understand something a bit more about it. You know, do you know what I mean? Like, there's certainly video games that try and explain this. I think, it would be. I think that's the only way you could approach a game that's for that kind of a goal.
Big challenge for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, And in some ways, I think even psychologically it'd be a big challenge because of what you'd be exposing yourself to.
True.
There is that kind of age-old saying of, you have to look after yourself in order to look after other people, right? And I think on a project like that, you'd need to find what coping methods you had to be able to be exposed to stuff that your brain isn't going to like. You're not going to like to have the knowledge of. Yep. And then in some way try to be a conduit to make sure that it's explained to the people who might play this game. Because it's games like that Dragon Cancer. The topic of cancer is horrible. Weirdly enough, yesterday my sister actually came out of hospital because of a breast cancer operation. It's the first time I've been exposed to it, but it's like those games that kind of try and get that feeling across, those games aren't necessarily there to make you happy or to give you the best feelings, but they will explain things to you. You will be able to understand the world a bit more. You will be able to understand things that relate to the real world as well, I think, in a lot of those games.
And better than any TV show or entertainment or infomercial, whatever can do, because you are inside the world, right? You're part of the world. So I think games, as you said, are an even more effective medium as maybe changing some minds out there and actually reaching people where they reach a new level of understanding of certain issues.
Yeah, I totally agree that the interactive nature, it just means like whenever you see, other than a documentary, if you see a television show or a drama that's been created, your lizard brain already knows that these are just actors and none of this is real. Right? Yeah. Like you already know that. And no matter how much they might say this is based on real world events, you won't necessarily have that kind of a connection compared to if in a video game, you're the one making either the choices or you're the one driving the narrative forwards. Like you're choosing to move forwards now. And because it's your choice, you understand and comprehend and contemplate the information even more. I mean, that's why To the Moon made me cry my eyes out. Because, it's like, you drive this thing all the time.
I think
video games can be such a powerful thing. And there was even a report like last week that came out that said that people who play video games for, I think it was like 4 hours a week or more or something like that, are happier than people who don't, And I think video games, we have such an opportunity for good. And there's a conflict there as well. Because obviously when, as a designer, we want to come in and always make something that's good and wholesome and is positive. But we've also got a chief financial officer that's saying, hey, you're making a football game.
FOMO.
EA are making $5 billion a year off their football game. What are they doing in that game to make $5 billion? Can you please go and put that in our game to make $5 billion? You've got to, there are sometimes just tough kind of it can be quite tough. And you sometimes just got to sort of pick and choose your battles sometimes, I think, with that kind of stuff.
Well, that's a very, very emotional note to end. We're already like 10 minutes over the end.
I mean, to be fair, we've not even hit a quarter of the notes that I've got here for stuff to talk about. Same. I've got everything from things like soft skills, so kind of like talking to people in the studio. Everybody's different. Everybody's fighting a battle.
I guess you have to come back.
Yeah, we'll save that for part 2, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We'll have to see what the listeners say. They might have got sick of me talking too fast and rambling on about other stuff. So all feedback is most appreciated, dear listeners. By all means, send comments at me.
Where can they find you? Where can listeners find you?
The biggest thing is Twitter. Probably it's at that there Tim. I come from a place called Yorkshire. And that there is kind of a saying when you point at something. So, go on then, pass us that there pie, or give us that there, whatever.
Cool. All right.
Pass us that there pie.
I thought you were just hilariously making like a play on Sven told me earlier before we started recording, like TTT, just that there, Tim.
No, that was something that I see. When I got offered the job at TT Games, I was like, maybe this is fate. Because my kind of, if a game can only allow me to have 8 characters or less, I end up having just TT_Tim. And I was like, well, okay, Traveller's Tales, TT Games, maybe it's fake
always
then.
rapping.
But in Yorkshire, so that there is kind of what you would say if you're pointing at something. So, I don't know, you're down the pub and say, hey, what are you doing with that there pint? Well, that there, Tim, is kind of just me. So, if you just look at that there, Tim, on Twitter, I think it's my handle on pretty much everything. So, like Steam,
we put it on the screen anyway.
Twitter,
here or here.
It'll be in the episode description, just a simple click away for people listening.
Cool, yeah. Yes. By all means, everybody flame me for my bad methods of making video games.
No flaming. This is a wholesome space. And
but yeah, I mean, I've got there's loads of other stuff, even things like book suggestions. So we mentioned about trying to think about your product not as you but as a user. There's a method from a guy called Edward De Bono, which uses 6 thinking hats, and they have 6 colors, and each hat has a different direction you can come at for thinking about things. That's a brilliant thing. We could talk about that in the podcast. How to do design documentation so that people will actually read it and it's actually useful.
I have this question on mine as well, because I saw your Twitter comment that you... with the and I fundamentally agree, so that's why I wanted to definitely talk about that as well, like not writing a 1,000-word essay as a design documentation, but instead keeping like a fresh and clickable wiki or something like this.
There's a few replies on actually that were really good. Like somebody mentioned about how having a lore Bible is a massive thick book. Well, yeah, absolutely. I cannot even imagine the lore Bible for World of Warcraft that's at Blizzard. Like, I know they've got like 3 or 4 people who are like lore architects just dedicated to maintaining this thing, because it's just, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's all stolen from Warhammer 40,000. Let's be honest, or Warhammer. Let's put that on the table. Shots fired. No, it's not. They've gone off. They've gone off of it now. But it's one of those things where, having a big document for something like lore or story, totally understand, right? Because it is quite a dense topic. But when it comes to game design, when it comes to mechanics, when it comes to levels, like these big thick documents, like people just don't read them. So we could have a whole podcast talking about those. I've got things like work for home tips and talking about the whole working from home pandemic fun times that we're now in.
Tim, why don't you come back next Sunday and then we do it as part 2? Easy peasy.
Oh, I'm sure there's probably somebody else already booked in for next week, isn't there?
We try to have a tight schedule, for the next coming weeks.
But I mean, certainly, like there's a lot of stuff. It was funny because when you first asked me onto the podcast, I was like, I talk a lot, but I've never actually sat down and done a talk or done a presentation. And then as I started writing, there's this list. I was like, oh no, actually, there's quite a lot of stuff. I've been here for 20 years doing this. Maybe I have learned a few things like along the way somewhere.
Yeah, certainly.
Most certainly.
Probably the biggest thing right now is save often. Just save. If you're listening to this working right now, save. Because if you don't, I've jinxed it. And Mayor is going to crash in about 3 seconds if you're not careful. So save your work right now.
On and off site. I have backups of everything I do, no matter what it is, on and off site. So if lightning hits my building and everything burns down, my work is still safe somewhere out there.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, again, we could probably have an entire podcast about sort of best working practices to make sure you don't lose your work. Because that is something. It's funny enough. It's something that I always find I have to teach the juniors or interns, because college and university doesn't teach them this stuff. And this is like something that, for me at least, hasn't changed in 20 years of game dev. It just hasn't. And it's something that is so critical to making sure you can do your job from day to day that I'm like, I would love to just do. Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should like do a talk someday about. Best,
why not?
101 tips of how not to lose your work.
Sounds like a book you could write.
Yeah, I know. Somebody has taken that. I'm so rubbish at like getting time to write things, probably because I play too many video games, that somebody else has probably taken that idea and is already halfway through chapter 5 of writing it now. So put me in the credits for it, will you?
Transcribing the podcast, turning it into a book.
I've even written down here about the future of game dev as well. I had some thought on that, some thoughts on where we're going with it. So.
Well, we're already at 1 hour 20, so this is we're shooting past the mark. But
it's all right. Just edit everything down.
It
Put
was
every fifth word out.
But it didn't feel like that long. It felt like 20 minutes. I think it was very enjoyable, all your insight that you had to share.
I mean, like I said, I do tend to ramble on. I don't think we even got to the end of my working list. I think we even there was still Sumo Digital and then starting at TT Games that we didn't even get to. But yeah, I'm sure people are bored of me rambling on now. So
no way. All right, maybe Sven, you can push our socials still, and
absolutely.
Oh yeah, true. So Tim's Twitter was, of course, that there, Tim. If you forgot it by now, our Twitter is, of course, it's Idiots Industry. And it's the other way around for Instagram if you want to check it out there. And you will, of course, find everything in the episode description or in the description below the YouTube video. Because we're now, as well, for the audio-only listeners, we're also in video form on YouTube now.
Yes, and also join our Discord community if you want to discuss topics, future topics, I know you have some guests that you would like to see on the show, then let us know in the Discord community here. All right, then as always, thank you for making us part of your weekly routine. And thank you, Tim, for being on the show. And
yes, big thanks.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been super enjoyable. It's been great.
Well, you've been great as well. So as always, bye.
Bye.
Bye.